I just wanted to say that tonight is my mother's yortzeit. This program is dedicated to the memory of both my parents, who passed away approximately 24 years ago. It's also dedicated to all the relatives that I never knew, both on my mother's side and my father's side, who perished in the Holocaust, and some of whose names I bear, and you'll find out about that as we go along. But this is not just a Holocaust story. This is basically a story of two families, and what we're going to be doing through these two families, I hope to show that their story is a microcosm of the tragedy and the triumph that Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, went through the ages. And what I'm going to be doing is, for the next hour or so, I'm going to be presenting this message through a series of pictures and also stories. And my parents can't tell the story because they're no longer around to tell the story. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be trying to tell the story for them. Now, first of all, let me just a brief comment. Why did I pick these pictures and why do I call it Discoveries of the Past and Back to the Future? First of all, many of the things that I'm going to be telling you this evening, I discovered after my parents had passed away. Some by accident, some by research, but these are all very, very interesting. That's the reason why in Hebrew I call this Giluim Ha'avar, discoveries from the past, Chazara La'atid, back to the future. So having said that, I just want to just add one other point as well. The picture on the right, on the upper right, is a picture of a monument in Treblinka in Poland, Treblinka extermination camp. Basically what you see here are small stones. Each stone is standing up, and each stone represents a Jewish community that was wiped out. And there are hundreds of these stones all over the field. Bigger stones talk about bigger communities. Obviously, smaller stones talk about smaller communities. And the picture on the lower left is the reunification of Jerusalem, which we just celebrated yesterday, Yom Yerushalayim at the Kotel. And even though we're talking about the Kotel, which is a wall which is many thousands of years old, the message is that it's back to our future. So having started that, I will continue now. I grew up in a household where there was a lot of silence. Baruch Hashem, I never experienced the Holocaust, but the Holocaust was always very, very present in my psyche as far as back as I can remember. I learned words like katsetnik, lager, lodge ghetto, about the same time I learned to say mama, tata, mother, father. And these were always with me. Now, in my house, in my parents' house, there were memorials. This is one example, Yizkor, which means remembrance, or memory sometimes, to the martyrs who died to sanctify God's name. On the right-hand side is the name of my father's family. On the left-hand side are the names of my mother's family. As you can see, my father came from a family of 8 siblings, and my mother came from a family of 7 siblings. And as you see, the names there represent who didn't make it. And as I said, again, I just want to repeat that I hope to turn this into a happy story at the end. This is a very, very interesting thing. I didn't explain before on the other slide because it wasn't that clear. Our daughter Shira, when she was age 12, had to make a shorashim, what's it called? Roots, family tree. But we didn't have a family tree. So basically what she did was that she drew in her own hand a copy of the thing that you just saw before that was hanging on my parents' wall. And basically what you see is a tree that was cut down out the trunk, and the no branches coming out, with the Magen David in the middle, and the name Estefega Bat Yitzchak, who was my father's daughter, or my half-sister, who perished in the Holocaust at age 7. And I'll relate to that a little bit later on as well. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, I had many, many friends, but I always felt different than other American kids. I didn't know why. I couldn't put my hand on it, but I always felt very, very different than other kids. And I didn't discover the reason why till 9, 10 years after I had already come to Israel. It was 1981. I was already married with children, and I attended this conference called the First World Gathering of Holocaust Survivors and Second Generation in Jerusalem, June 1981. And I was attending a workshop there, and the purpose of the workshop was to get our parents, so this is only for second generation, this was a workshop to get our parents to somehow open up, right? To teach us various techniques on how to get our parents to talk about their experiences and put it either on video or tape it or whatever. And in the middle of the workshop, this fellow stands up, California, he's about 6'4", 6'5", bleach blonde hair down to his shoulders. It's the first time I'd seen a man with an earring. I mean, today it's stylish, but this was the first time I saw it. His name was Brad or Tad or something like that. Very sun-tanned. He looked like something right out of a Beach Boy album. And all of a sudden he stands up and he says, "All my life I felt alone. I didn't know why, but I felt alone." And I realized that it was because I didn't have any brothers or sisters, I didn't have any grandparents, I didn't have any aunts and uncles. And this is the first day, the first time in my life that I'm sitting here in a room with 100 strangers and I feel closer to you than all my friends back in California. Just 30 years ago, I still get emotional. Needless to say, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And everybody started with the California group hugs and et cetera. But it was a very, very emotional experience for all of us. And this sort of started, and this was the trigger, this sort of started me on my journey to find out more about my parents' past. Now, one of the discoveries I had, and I'll start with one of the latest ones, happened about 3.5 years ago in the middle of Operation Cast Lead, also known as Ofer Kutzika, when Israel invaded Gaza. And I remember that I was working at the computer, and all of a sudden I was checking the news reports on the computer, and all of a sudden I see a report that a certain actress, actually of Jewish descent, she had a Jewish father, came out with a statement that Israel is bombing the largest concentration camp in the world, Gaza. Full of lies. We all know that. It's full of lies. But this is what she said. And obviously because she's an actress, Hollywood, etc., her inane statement made headlines all over the world. And this is what I saw on the internet. I don't know what happened. But at that moment, something just came over to me, and I just closed the computer. I got into the car, and went straight to Yad Vashem. It was also Asara B'Tevet, same day, which is also the time that the general Kaddish for the people who were in the Holocaust. And I paid to take the tour. Now, at first I said, why am I doing this? I know all this already. I mean, I've been living the Holocaust all my life. Why am I taking this tour? And for 2.5 hours while I'm taking the tour, I said, why did I do this? Why did I do this? And at the very, very end of the tour, towards the very end, the last few minutes of the tour, I came to a very big picture on the wall. So, this is the picture that's on the wall. This is a famous photograph. The guide said that this was the first Shavuos or Pentecost service held in Buchenwald concentration camp right after the war. This is about 2 or 3 weeks after they had just been freed. You'll see in the picture, there's a mixture of Jewish GIs together with concentration camp inmates. Some of them are still in their prison garb. And there's a little boy over here, there's a little boy here between 2 GIs. And this little boy is Rav Lau. And the guide said, this is Rav Lau. And then what happened, this is a wall-size picture. The picture that they have in the Yad Vashem is 2 or 3 times the size of this one. I start to stare at the picture, and 2 rows above one of the GIs, I come to see a pair of eyes staring down at me. Where that red circle is a picture of my father. My father had been in Buchenwald. I don't have to tell you what kind of tsunami rush went through me. This was more than 20 years after he passed away here in Eretz Yisrael. And first of all, I mean, seeing his eyes, and it's sort of like he came back to me. Then all of a sudden I understood what drove me to go to Yad Vashem that day, to see that thing. And through my search, and this is just one discovery that I just wanted to mention to you, and there are many, many more as I go along. 9 years before this discovery, I had heard that there was a large ghetto exhibit in Yad Vashem, and Aviva had just seen it with some colleagues of hers, and she suggested I go there because maybe I could spot a picture of my father or a news clip, because it was the whole thing. They had the whole model there of the ghetto, and at the very end of the ghetto, they had these 4 very thick books with names and addresses and occupation, etc. in there. Now these books were like the size of Manhattan telephone books. So I automatically turned to the S's, and you can't see it, but from the top of the orange line all the way down to past the yellow lines, to the bottom there, you'll see, those who have good eyesight can see the name Stanislawski. And what I discovered there was 24 names that were either aunts, uncles, cousins. I found my father's name there. My father was in yellow. And in orange, up above, I saw my sister's name, my half-sister. My father had been married before the war. He and his family were taken. They were in the Lodz ghetto. In 1942, my father's first wife, and then after subsequently his daughter, were taken away to Chelmno extermination camp, and that's where they were murdered. Now I never knew my sister's Yortzeit. Yortzeit, by the way, is day of remembrance. It's the anniversary of one's death. And what I did was I went to the curator of the exhibit, and I asked him, my father told me to put my sister's name on his tombstone because he did not know when she passed away. So he said, what day was she taken out of the ghetto? And the far right-hand column had the dates of when they were out of the ghetto, and it said September 23rd, 1942. So he said, oh yes, I remember. That was at a big kinder transport where they took 5,000 Jewish children, all under the age of 10. They put them into cattle cars. They took them to the Chelmno extermination camp. It wasn't even a concentration camp, which was only 60 kilometers from Lodz. And he says if they were taken in the morning, which they probably were, so by the time in the afternoon, she was probably up in smoke. And before I continue with this story, some of you may have heard this, but I'll repeat it for the camera as well. Those of you who know me, I don't like to daven for the Yom. I don't like to be a prayer leader in the synagogue. But for some reason or other, every time right after Yom Kippur, the evening service right after Yom Kippur, for some reason or other, if there's no one who has an obligation to go before the thing, I used to always run up here right after the chazan finished, and I started to daven Marav. I didn't know why, and my wife can testify. I've been doing this for like 35, 40 years, because otherwise I don't like to daven at all. And I went home and I looked up the September 23rd, 1942. We came out to Yud Aleph Tishrei, the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur. Another discovery. Okay. So again, after my parents died. Now my father only was able to keep one item that he had with him pre-war. Everything else was taken away from him, but he managed to keep one item. This is the item. This is a picture of my sister. The original was a little wallet-sized thing. He managed to keep it wrapped up in rags around his feet. Now, the rags served as bandages. It was inside between his leg and the bandages. And this picture survived the entire war this way. For 4 years in the Lodz Ghetto, then in the Chenstochov work camp, then afterwards in Buchenwald, where he was freed. You can even see the creases still come from obviously from the perspiration or whatever. And last summer, I have to say that for many, many years, I tried to avoid going to all these trips in Poland, even though they were much in style. I tried going not to do this. But my wife convinced me to go last summer, and I went. And it was a very, very spiritually uplifting experience. First of all, the circle came full round, because what I did was right before we left, I took her picture, I blew it up even more. I wrote a commemoration in Hebrew, English, and in Polish. And we went to the Cholno extermination camp where she would be murdered. And I stood next to the mass grave where she was together with hundreds of thousands of other Jews that were murdered there. And I told her story, the story I just told you. And the picture that you see here is that I had this framed photograph with me. They have a small museum in Cholno. It's the size of a trailer, a caravan. And the reason why it's there is that after the war, archaeologists started digging up the pits, and they found various artifacts, but there were no pictures of actual people who were there. There were just pictures of Nazis, or pictures of their henchmen, and they found a spoon or a fork or part of a tefillin or whatever, but they didn't find any pictures. And I came in, and there's a caretaker at the thing. I pointed to the Polish, because he didn't know any other language except for Polish, and he understood, and reverently he took that picture and he put it in a place in the museum. And what this is the last frame of a movie that I made of the presentation, and this picture now is in Cholno extermination camp. So for me, this was the circle coming full round. Okay, a little bit about my mother's family. My mother came from a family of 5 sisters and 2 brothers. The 5 sisters are pictured on the photograph on the left, with 1 brother. My mother is circled there. The other brother is the tall gentleman standing in the picture on the right. That's my grandfather, who's the older gentleman in the middle. The older brother had 4 or 5 children, which you see. Now, what happened is that, just to give you some sort of proportion, that my mother, and just going a little bit further, and I'll take the proportion. What happened was that in 1939, Hitler and Stalin made a pact. What they did was they split Poland in half. Hitler was in the western part of Poland, and Stalin was in the eastern part of Poland. And what happened was in June of 1941, Operation Barbarossa, Hitler double-crossed Stalin and invaded the eastern part of Poland. What happened was that my mother saw the writing on the wall, and she managed to escape together with one sister, to Russia, together with the retreating Russian troops. The town that she was from, Rovno, was only a few kilometers from the Russian border, so she was able to escape with them. So she and this sister, whom we saw before, it's the one to the right of her, the only ones that survived. There's another sister who was standing on the left and back row, who managed to get out of Poland. She went to Argentina before the war. And so in other words, those three sisters survived. Both brothers, they were all married. All the other children were married with children. They were all wiped out. Now, also to give you again some sort of idea of what we're talking about, in November of 1941, the Germans gathered together all the Jews of Rovno. There were about 28,000 altogether. The first 23,000 they marched into a forest and shot them all. The other 5,000 they made use of them for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then afterwards they got killed as well. And to give you a sense of proportion, this is a picture of a family simcha of Machatonim, of one of my aunts and uncles. My mother is in red. Everyone else in this picture was murdered in that forest. To give you some sort of example of what happened. Now, my mother, as I said, was in Russia, but she didn't exactly. She was better off than the camps in Germany or in Poland, but she didn't exactly have a picnic. What she did was that first of all she baked bread for the Russian army, 8 tons of bread for the Russian army in the middle of the Battle of Stalingrad. She worked as a lumberjack in Siberia. Okay, she also sewed uniforms for the Russian army when they were invading Finland. And she was always, for 5 years that she was in Russia, she was always one step ahead of the Nazis. But thank God she survived. I call the next section basically rebirth and renewal for the simple reason that very much like the Jewish people who went through the Holocaust, they also managed to rebuild their lives. As I said, they're a microcosm. My parents met in a displaced persons camp, or also known as a DP camp, in Lodz. They had both gone back to Poland to look for any surviving relatives. They didn't find anybody, but they found each other. And within 2 weeks, they got married. They knew that Poland was about to be taken over by the communists, so they managed to get to the American zone of Germany, and they were in another displaced persons camp called Fehrenwald. Fehrenwald is where I was born. And this is a picture of the Stanislawski family in 1947, and this was the beginning of the blooming. In other words, we started seeing that the tree that had been cut down all of a sudden started to take shape. It started leaves and buds and started to grow. My father in Fehrenwald, as you can see, was a community policeman, keeper of the peace, so to speak. Sometimes people get into arguments. What I must also say is my father also taught me the theory of relativity. I'm not talking about Einstein's relativity. I'm talking about concentration camp relativity. Okay? Our family, the 3 of us, shared a half a room with another family also, a mother, father, and a child. The 2 families were separated by a sheet. Now, to anyone sitting here today, they say, how did 6 people live in one room, especially 2 separate families? Well, to my father, this was Garden of Eden, because a year earlier, he'd been sleeping in Buchenwald on a wooden plank with 6 other people on that same wooden plank. So all of a sudden, he had a bed of his own, and he only had to share half a room with 6 other people instead of one plank. So this was my father's theory of relativity. My father was also quite active in the DP camp, and he caught the eye of a very, very unique individual. This unique individual was Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam, also known as the Kloisenberger Rebbe. The Kloisenberger Rebbe himself also went through the camps. His wife and 11 children perished in the camps. He came back, he was in the same DP camps as my parents. And he saw that my father was one of these people who could acquire items, okay? And he decided that he wanted to build a synagogue and a place of learning, also known as Beit Midrash, in the camp. And he asked my father, I want you to get me the chairs, tables, books, Torah, Megillah, you name it. And my father got it for him. So what happened was that he became the shamash, also known as an aide to the Rebbe. Now just to fast forward 55 years later, here in Israel, my wife and I are on vacation in Tzfat. We're staying in the Rimon Inn. And the closest synagogue to the hotel where we were staying was the Tzanzer Shtibel. Tzanz is one of the rabbi's sons. In other words, he had several sons, so each one had to get his own Hasidic dynasty. So he became the Tzanzer Hasidim. But everybody still respected the name, because one son still Kloisenberg, the other son became Tzanz. Now, I come in for the evening prayer service. I came in a few minutes early, and they're in the middle of giving a Torah lecture. And I'm in jeans, and I'm wearing a knitted kippah, and I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt. And obviously I did not fit in with any of the other people there who were dressed in basic black. And nobody paid any attention to me. This went on for a couple of days. Okay, they accepted me. Now, I must say that on a personal level, Hasidim are very, very warm people, but they're a very, very tightly knit, secluded group, and they're very aware of strangers. And to them, I was a stranger. The third night that I was there, still nobody paid attention to me, but I came in early, and what I did was I took a book off the shelf, and the book happened to be the life history of Rabbi Yehuda Halberstam. And I started going through the book. And one of the Hasidim comes over to me, and he sees I'm reading about his Rebbe. So he says to me in Hebrew, he says, he was a great man. I said, I know. He was my godfather at my bris. Needless to say, the man's jaw dropped. Because how does this guy, who did keep our jeans, fit in with his Rebbe that, he was a Sandik at my bris? Anyway, as soon as the Torah lecture finished, I see him beeline right before they started to die, and I see him buzzing, he's pointing in my direction, whatever. About 15, 20 men there. They all come over to me, line up, and they all start to shake my hand. And in Yiddish, they start saying, "Van wanneer komt Yid? Where are you from? What are you doing? You know, whatever." I even got an Aliyah Torah the next day, and I didn't have to pay for it. Okay. 3 years later, I went back to the same place. They didn't remember me at all. So at least for one brief moment, I knew what it meant to be, a brother in the hood, or a member of the tribe, or all these things. Or in the South, it's a good old boy. So this was my connection with the Kloisenberger Rebbe. We were in Fair involved for 3 years, and these pictures were taken in May of 1949. What's important about this, especially the picture on the right, is that in May of 1949, Israel celebrated its first Independence Day. And the Jews in the camp made a parade. They had a parade there. My father, Zechron Avracha, may he rest in peace, made a little flag for me, and after the parade, I was still waving the flag. This picture was taken of me right after the parade of the first anniversary of the creation of the State of Israel, or rebirth of the State of Israel. So I knew about this picture. I have a picture in my house, but I had this elderly aunt who escaped together with my mother, died a few years ago in Herzliya at the ripe old age. And I was going through her picture albums. I discovered this picture, and I saw a note from my mother on the other side, written saying that this was taken on the first Yom Ha'atzmaut, or the first Israel Independence Day, 1949. 1950, my parents got a visa to enter the United States. We the United States in January of 1950. We arrived in New Orleans instead of Ellis Island, like most of the immigrants. And the entry officials, as in Hebrew they say Pekidei Kabbalah. I'm sure that all of you, those who don't speak Hebrew, know what a Pekid Kabbalah is. Pekidei Klita, you can say. When they got to me, he says, "What's your son's name?" And my parents say, Gedalia Mordechai Stanislawski. And they said, "Your son is not going to survive in the USA with a name like Gedalia Mordechai Stanislawski." And then they took a look, and they saw we're on the list to go to a place called Atlanta, Georgia. My parents didn't know from anything. They said, "Okay, we'll call him George." And that's how I got my name. So in other words, some non-Jewish immigration official in New Orleans gave me the name George, and it's still with me till today. Okay, that's sure. My name named after my two grandfathers, as my wife just pointed out. Gedalia was my mother's father, and Mordechai was my father's father. And they were the two grandfathers. All right, we came to Atlanta, Georgia. This is a picture of the first home we owned. It took a few years to do that. I'm standing here in front of the first home. The Atlanta Jewish community was a wonderful, wonderful place. First of all, they adopted 200 refugee families. Of the 200, my father was the only one who remained observant. He was everyone else went into business. They opened up a grocery store, a liquor store, whatever, and obviously Saturday was the best business day, so obviously they didn't. He went to work as an ordinary laborer, and this is he made his living from that. My mother, to supplement his income, used to rent out to boarders. They had 3-bedroom house, so they were in one room, I was in another room, and the boarder was in the 3rd bedroom. And sometimes, because there were very few kosher families in Atlanta in those days, so whenever they'd have emissaries coming over from Israel to collect money for yeshivot, they would stay in our house. And what I usually ended up doing was I had to share my bedroom with one of the emissaries who came to collect money. So this was the way I spent my childhood. Now my parents were very, very simple people. They were not educated by any way or mean, but they had a basic faith in I can't say in other words, Yiddishkeit. Judaism is not a correct translation. It's not an exact translation, but they had this basic faith that stayed with them throughout their lives. And when the rabbi in Atlanta, Rabbi Feldman, came and told my parents that if you want your son to remain Jewish, he didn't say remain observant, remain Jewish, you have to send him away. And at age 12, when I was age 12, they made a very big decision, as I was an only child. They sent me away to yeshiva in Baltimore. Baltimore was 1,000 kilometers from Atlanta, over 600 miles from Atlanta. And I only came home 4 times a year. And airplanes in those days were for millionaires. We were talking about 1959, 1960. Airplanes in those days were for millionaires. So it was a 16-hour train ride. So I only came home to Atlanta 4 times a year. My parents visited occasionally, but most of the time they weren't there. Now, as I said, my parents didn't talk very much about the Holocaust. But sometimes I think one of the earliest discoveries I made was at age 13, and I didn't even realize that it was a discovery because I was too young and immature to appreciate it. As a bar mitzvah present, my parents had taken me down to Miami Beach on vacation. This was my bar mitzvah present. And I was walking along Collins Avenue in Miami Beach with my father, and all of a sudden this man stops my father in the middle of the street, and he points at him and he says, Buchenwald, February, March 1945. My father said, he says in Yiddish. And my father says, yes, I was there. Who are you? And then the man said to my father, you saved my life. He says, how did I save your life? He says, I was a teenager at the time. I didn't know how to ration. And I went through my bread ration for the day. They were both slave laborers in Buchenwald. And you shared your bread ration with me. And that gave me enough strength to continue for another day. I didn't remember the story. And it was only when we were visiting Auschwitz in the summer, and one of our guides was reading an excerpt from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he describes that even in the hell of Auschwitz, when people were reduced to beasts who would, let's say, fight over a piece of food, there were still glimmerings of humanity. And after hearing the Viktor Frankl passage, all of a sudden this thought that hadn't been in my mind for over 40 years, all of a sudden came in, and I related the story that I just related to you in the middle of Auschwitz. In 1966, a miracle happened. My father discovered a brother. 21 years after the Holocaust, my father discovered a brother. This was a brother who had left Poland in 1925 before the war as a teenager. He had moved to France with some other relatives, and he was an apprentice for one of the relatives. When the war broke out, he was a French soldier, and obviously he was caught, and they didn't know he was Jewish, so he survived the war as a prisoner of war in a French prisoner of war camp. After the war, he was looking for relatives. After the war, my father was looking for relatives. But for some reason or another, nothing was computerized in those days, because even though they had this big UNIVAC stuff, but it wasn't done. And the only thing they had to work with were index cards. So they had one set of index cards in France where my father put in a claim, and they had another set of index cards in New York where my father put a claim. When my father's brother was in France, and my father put it there. And it took Hayas 21 years to cross-reference the two together. And this is how they discovered. Now, this reunion made the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Two brothers meet after not seeing each other for 41 years. And I don't know what I have to tell you, what I felt like all of a sudden I had an uncle that I could identify with.
Just tell him why it's personal and he has not 21, because he said...
I did. I said...
We've
been filming. I did say it. Okay. The brother and his wife came, my uncle and his wife came to Atlanta. They made a reception for them in our synagogue. Just as a point of curiosity, his wife, a lady in the black, during the war, they had a son as well, whom he hid with Christians, and thank God they were able to get him back after the war. She was fighting the partisans. And after D-Day, when the American Army and the American-British Army started to liberate various parts of France, she was in one of the advanced units that liberated her husband from the prisoner of war camp where he was. Something also happened during that visit as well. I'd never had any pictures. I told you before, there were names but no faces. My uncle brought a picture of my grandmother, Stanislawski, who was on the left, and this was the first time at age 19 that all of a sudden I had a picture to identify the name with. 2 years after that, I got married, and this aunt from Argentina who came to our wedding, this was the first time I had seen my aunt at age 21, this was the first time I'd seen my aunt, brought a picture of my grandfather, her father, my grandfather. And this is Stanislawski. And this is all of a sudden, I had some sort of connection, and I started feeling that I'm having family, I had family members I could relate to all of a sudden. This journey that I've been telling you about was also a journey of self-realization for me. That's the reason I call it Future.avi. And I also call it a flight to remember. Before I can tell you the story, I have to take a drink. Excuse me, please. Aviv and I had made a deal with our parents that instead of a big wedding, we would have a small wedding, and the difference would be a cash present a year in Israel. And we came to Israel, and I was studying in Merkaz Rav Kook, and Aviva was in Hebrew University. And about a third of the way through our year-long stay, we discovered that her mother had terminal cancer, and we had to cut a trip short. We didn't know at the time, though, but we went back for 3 weeks during Hanukkah vacation, winter holidays, and we saw that the situation was serious. So she stayed on in New York, and I came back to Israel again by myself for 6 days. Now, because I had a type of ticket with a stopover in France, I used the opportunity to visit my uncle, whom I had just discovered 2 years earlier, and also to visit my cousin, whom I'd never seen, and his family. I visited with them for 2 days, and then in Paris airport, I'm getting on the plane. It was an El Al flight, and lo and behold, an El Al jumbo with only 12 people on the flight. Now, is there anyone in this room here who has ever taken an El Al flight with only 12 people, 300 empty seats? Okay? About 25 minutes after we take off, we're landing again. This was supposed to be a non-stop flight to Tel Aviv. And we stopped in Vienna. In Vienna, hundreds of people started getting on, tattered clothing, no hand luggage whatsoever, disheveled. And I discovered who these people were. These people were refugees from Poland. In 1968, 1969, Poland had another pogrom. In other words, the Holocaust wasn't enough. Under communist rule, what happened, Poland was going through an economic downturn. People were begging for bread. And obviously, the Jews make a good scapegoat. There were only about 20, 25,000 Jews left in Poland at the time. But that's enough to be a scapegoat. And what they started to do was they had pogroms against the Jews. The people who got on that flight were people who managed to cross the border into Austria and make their way to Vienna, where the Jewish agency had offices to put them on a flight. And though my knowledge of Polish is non-existent, my knowledge of Hebrew is relatively decent. And I was having conversations with these people in Yiddish. And the stories that they were telling me, how they escaped, were hair-raising. And I listened to this for a couple of hours. In the middle of these conversations, the captain announces that we're about to enter Israeli airspace, so everybody sit down and buckle your seatbelts. The exact opposite happened. As soon as he started to make this announcement, they started to dance in the aisles. From nowhere, a bottle of vodka appeared, and we started passing around mouth to mouth. Okay, I'm not a drinker, but I drank. That night I drank. And it was a very emotional experience. Now, people often ask me, what made you decide to live in Israel? And my answer is that moment. Because at that moment, even though these people didn't have a dime to their names, or a farthing as for the British they're here, I felt that I was less fortunate than these people. For the simple reason I knew that they were coming to Israel to live, and I was only coming for 6 days just to pack up. And we started to go on an Aliyah plan. And 3.5 years later, we were able to realize that dream. Would I have ever believed that I would be able to see God's goodness in the land of life? And we came here in March of 1972 with 2 children. Thank God we had other children. Our family started to grow. We settled in quite nicely. My parents, after my father retired, decided to follow us because their only grandchildren were living in Israel. And we also came to Israel. Now my father, again, I explained to you that he was a go-getter in the camps. He had another thing as well. There was no shul in Atlanta that he didn't belong to, that he didn't become a gabbai, or like the guy that ran the show, within a couple of months after joining the shul. Same thing happened here in Israel without knowing a word of Hebrew. They managed to do the same thing again. They had a good life here. They lived first in Stanislawski, but afterwards in Ramat Eshkol. Thank God my parents did to see his oldest grandson's bar mitzvah at the Kotel. My parents also dedicated the Sefer Torah to this synagogue, which is still in use. Something very special about this Sefer, because this particular Torah scroll, I didn't even realize, I only noticed the connection a couple of days ago when I was preparing this lecture. I noticed that the time that this Torah scroll is read is, unfortunately, when in a Shiva house, in a house of mourning. And it's also read every Rosh Chodesh. In other words, we'll be reading from tomorrow morning, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, every new moon. And the connection is that a house of mourning represents remembrance of the past. Rosh Chodesh is renewal. Because we're like the moon. Jewish people like the moon. We wane, we wax, we wane, we wax, and we always renewing ourselves. And this Sefer Torah that my parents dedicated to the shul represents both this, and both the remembrance and also the renewal that I'm talking about here. Last year, we were very, very fortunate and privileged to attend a Holocaust remembrance ceremony in the Jewish community of Bet El, which is about 30 minutes outside of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. And we attended the candlelighting ceremony that they had there. And our oldest grandson, who is the third great-grandson of Yitzhak and Stanislawski, lit the 6th candle. Now, the first 5 candles represent either survivors or child survivors or somebody who helped save Jews or whatever. The last candle represented the future. And the great-grandson of Yitzhak and Stanislawski, whom unfortunately they did not live to meet him, represented the future of the people of Israel. That there is continuity. Even after the Holocaust, there is continuity. Another story about renewal. I mentioned to you earlier that we were in Poland last year, and aside from the very moving account I told about my sister's, putting my sister's picture on the, inside the museum, we spent a Shabbat in Krakow. And the whole time that I'm in Krakow, a certain scene from Schindler's List keeps coming through my mind over and over and over and over again. The actor who played the Nazi officer Amon Gurt was a real Nazi murderer. he tells his people that, gentlemen, tonight we are committing history. We're doing history. For 600 years, there was an uninterrupted Jewish presence in Krakow. Tonight we're doing history because I can say that as of tonight, Krakow is Jew-free. This is running through my mind. We're part of an Israeli group is in Krakow. It's Shabbat. We can't carry Krakow. We're walking 65 years after 67 years after he makes this statement. We are walking with our prayer shawls, our talitot, freely through Krakow. We attended a service, 300 people. It's true that the 290 of them were tourists, but believe it or not, what's happening now all over Poland is that there are young people in the 20s and 30s all of a sudden discovering they had a Jewish grandfather or a Jewish grandmother, whatever. Some of them are Jewish, some have to go through conversion. And wherever we visited, we see this happening. There's a Jewish renewal going in Poland as well. Some plan to help this Jewish renewal by being there and serving as teachers. Others are learning Hebrew with the intent of coming to Israel. The other emotional experience that I had in Krakow is when we came out of the services, there was a group of about 100, 150 kids from North America standing in a circle, and they're singing the song Vihisha Amdo, which does not need translation for the people in this thing, but just for the people who are watching this on film. It basically means in every generation, our enemies come and stand up against us, but the Almighty always comes and rescues us from them. It's a very, very rough translation. Now, we're getting close to the end. Okay, those of you who don't know Yiddish, I'm going to teach you a little bit of Yiddish tonight. Okay, there's a Yiddish word called einikel. The word einikel means grandchild in Yiddish, and I was once at heard a rabbi speaking where he asked the people who attended, he asked them, what is the root of the word einikel? So a person raised his hands and said, well, maybe it's a German word, because after all, 70% of Yiddish comes from German, and the other 30% is whatever country the people lived in. So the rabbi said, maybe, but maybe it comes from somewhere else. There's a verse in Shemot, which is Exodus, book of Exodus. It says, "V'hasneh einenu ukal." The bush does not become consumed. Einikel einenu ukal. Does not become the burning bush. The burning bush is burning and does not come consumed. Basically, what's happening is that the bush represents the Jewish people. Burning represents the Holocaust, it runs the pogroms, it's intermarriage, you have it. But with all that burning going on, the bush does not become consumed. The rabbi said, when do you know that your bush does not come consumed? When you have an einikel who continues in your way. Knows in your type of observance. This is when you know that it doesn't. And this sort of brings me full circle around. Because remember the tree trunk that I showed you at the very, very beginning? Okay? It has sprouted leaves. It has grown. Fourth generation after Yitzhak becomes Stanislawski, you now see their descendants here. And I also owe you an explanation, which I plan to say first before the explanation. There was one family member who was left out, who was born 6 weeks ago. This is Rigna Stanislawski. He was born April 15th. As I said, 5 weeks ago, thank you. And she represents the future. What's also very interesting is that she is the number Chai, which is the numerical equivalent of 18. She's the Chai grandchild, great-grandchild of Yitzhak and Stanislawski. So this is another metaphor of how the people of Israel have Am Yisrael Chai through this as well. Now, I told you I'm going to give you an explanation of why I chose these pictures. I said that I chose these stones because they're standing up. What I didn't tell you was the symbolism of the stones, to me at least, represented skeletons standing. And the thing that came into my mind was the valley of the dry bones that appears in the prophet Ezekiel, or Yechezkel as we know him. And I saw the prophecy in front of my eyes. And what I want to do is just briefly read to you an English translation, a very rough English translation of part of the prophecy. This is normally read during the Shabbat of intermediate days of the holiday of Passover. We didn't have an intermediate day of Shabbat this year, so we didn't read it. So it's even more of a reason to read it now. Instead of using the Almighty, I use the word Hashem. I put that in on purpose. The Spirit of Hashem set me down in the middle of the valley. It was full of bones, and behold, they were dry. Then he said to me, prophesy over these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Hashem. Thus I say to these bones, and I will lay sinews upon you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am Hashem. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, our hope is lost. We are indeed cut off. And Hashem answered, Behold, I will open your graves and raise you from these graves, O my people. I will bring you into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am Hashem. Now, Yechezkel made this prophecy over 2,600 years ago during the first Babylonian exile. About 2,300 years after the prophet Yechezkel made this statement, King Louis XIV, sometime in the mid-17th century, he went on the throne at age 5, and he assumed regal powers at age 18, legally of age. He had just finished reading the Bible, and he called Blaise Pascal into him. And Pascal, for those of you who don't know, was the preeminent philosopher, scientist, mathematician of the day. He was, I guess, the French equivalent of Stephen Hawking, even though I guess Pascal had a little bit more faith in God than Stephen Hawking does. And the king asked Pascal, are there any miracles today? And Pascal answered, yes, Your Majesty, the Jews are miracles today. Because according to every single account, we shouldn't have been here. But we're here. But not only we're here, but we're thriving as well. Now, Pascal made this statement about 360 years ago. Think of how many pogroms and Holocaust and you name it has been, and we're still here. Now, today, living here in Israel, I always say that I have spiritual lenses because I can see miracles happening every day, my personal life and what happening all around us. When I was living in the United States, I didn't see these things, but here in Israel, I see it. It's very, very clear. And we see these miracles happening all the time. If you consider that 67 years ago, 1/3 of our people were wiped out. 3 years later, there was a state of Israel. 19 years after that, 22 years after the Holocaust, there was already united Jerusalem. In the 1990s, early 1990s, we absorbed hundreds of thousands of immigrants from Russia and Ethiopia. They all found jobs. And even though we're surrounded by enemies, we're thriving. But not only we're thriving, we're even exporting. Where there isn't a single country in the world that doesn't use some sort of Israeli product. They may not know it, but it is. Intel, Microsoft, Google, they all have offices here. We export our technology to all over the world. We export all our medical advances all over the world as well. Israelis don't just do that as far as high tech, but they give of themselves as well. They're Israelis will travel halfway around the world to Japan, to Haiti, even to Turkey, to help rescue others. In fact, right now there was a item on the news a couple of days ago of where America is sending rescue teams now to Israel to learn Israeli methods. So all I can say is that those of us who are living here have we are fortunate and we have privilege to have a ringside seat of witnessing these miracles before our very eyes. So basically what I'm saying to you now is hold on for the ride. It's going to be bumpy, it's going to be rocky, but it's going to be good, it's going to be successful. Welcome to the future. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. There's refreshments outside for